Hey guys, how's it going? I hope you had a great summer, or having a great summer, or your first week of classes went well. Any of that? Hope it went all great. Now, look, I know it's been kind of a while since my last upload, but there's a good reason for that because I kind of just didn't really know what to make. There wasn't really a lot of shows, movies, or music that was coming out, or I just didn't have anything all that important to say about any of the recent releases. Then once I did come up with an idea and write out the script, my allergies really started to flare up bad, or I just have a cold. I don't know. Hopefully it's hard to tell from my voice, but I am feeling kind of icky. So I kind of delayed the recording of all of this. But enough of that, because like nobody gives a shit. Let's cut to the chase. So I decided that for this video, we'd spice things up, try something different. Part of what I like being such a small channel is that I can try anything and it's really not an issue. I ain't got nothing to lose. Today we are trying a new video format, or even series if this video does well. Today we're going to fix the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. Now I know this show came out a while ago. I know it's not totally relevant right now. I know you probably heard all the problems associated with it. What if I tell you that with some key changes, it could have been a really great piece of Star Wars TV. Now another thing, we're not going to get into all the issues and problems associated with the sequels, with Disney's treatment and usage of the IP, the prequels, or even the original trilogy. In some ways, regarding Disney's practices with the medium Star Wars, I will be talking about them a little bit, but if you came to this video wanting me to bash literally everything Disney has done with the franchise for the past decade, then you came to the wrong place. Because yes, in a lot of ways they did definitely fuck up. We have gotten some Star Wars content that I believe represents some of the best the franchise has to offer. This is just going to be an experimental video where I suggest some changes and basically present my version of the show, see how the changes may play out, and try to fix what I believe is a very flawed show that severely disappoints me to this day. But before I start just tearing this show to shreds, I'm going to talk about what the show does right, because the show isn't worthless. I wouldn't even call it terrible. For one thing, I think the acting for both Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen is honestly really good. And it's clear that even when the material they have to work with isn't quite there, these guys really enjoy playing these characters, and that does shine through in their performances. Exploring Obi-Wan's mental state between episodes 3 and 4 might seem a bit silly, kind of nonsensical to explore in a show, but I honestly think it's an interesting idea to watch him develop from a noble young master to a seasoned, wise old man by the time A New Hope rolls around. Likewise, I really like just how spiteful and vengeful Hayden is as Vader. This is easily the strongest Vader has been as a character since like, I don't know, 1983. And seeing just how broken he's become to this point sweetens his eventual redemption just a little bit more. I also think that while the choreography for most of the fights is kind of lacking, the last fight and the last episode in particular is actually pretty good. I do like that in each of the fights, the light from the sabers shines so vividly and vibrantly on the characters' faces, and overall just the lighting in general in a lot of scenes is very effective. Obi-Wan actually uses his force powers in their fight in organic and fun ways instead of just making like a static one-on-one lightsaber fight. I also really like Vader and Obi-Wan's conversation before they depart again, and it honestly finishes Obi-Wan's arc pretty well within the context of where the show stands as a whole. In their conversation, I like that as it becomes clearer and clearer that at this stage there is no turning Anakin back. The blue light shining from Obi-Wan's saber is slowly swallowed by the evil, violent red from Anakin's saber. It's a subtle little touch that showed me that the writers of this show had some really good ideas. But yeah, that's kind of where the positive aspects end for me, unfortunately. I think this show perfectly illustrates every problem and bad habit Disney has when making these Star Wars shows, or even the Marvel shows, to be honest. First off, I hate the way that most of these scenes are directed. Shots feel so unplanned or just uncoordinated. Most dialogue-heavy scenes, or just scenes that people are talking, are just done in such a boring and blasé way. Just get a couple close-ups, a medium shot, and a wide maybe, and yeah, you're good. That's all you need to do. The action scenes are all handheld with a bunch of shaky camera work. They don't have the weight or frenetic energy that guys like Paul Greengrass or Michael Mann could do in their sleep. It just feels sloppy, like they didn't even give a shit where the camera was, because the choreography is all that matters. Not to mention, I know I just praised the lighting in the final fight between Obi-Wan and Vader, but most of the time it's just a bit too difficult to really see the attacks flying around from either of them. The show kind of just looks sludgy, ugly in general. Yeah, the fights in the prequels are a mixed bag, but all of them, well, most of them, allow you to clearly see the action in the faces of the characters involved in that duel. The fights are too haphazard, and while the choreography is passable most of the time, it's truncated by just how shaky the camera work is. Also, like, the world of Star Wars has never looked so uninviting, no? Like, we spend a lot of time on Tatooine, another desert planet, a third desert planet, Alderaan. Where are the interesting locales, the cool scenery? None of the arenas in these fights have any memorable backdrops. Nothing in the show comes even close to matching the orange and blue hues bleeding through the steam in Cloud City, or the harsh red in the throne room scene in The Last Jedi, or the chaotic lava backgrounds of Mustafar. It's all just sand, rocks, and more sand. Just overall, the photography and the directing is just lacking in this show. And yeah, it's easy to say, oh, just direct the show better, but I think the solution to this problem is a bit more complicated and showcases a huge problem that Disney has when picking people to helm these extravagant, action-heavy fantasy epics. See, when Disney was picking directors for the sequel trilogy, no matter what you think of the movies, they make sense. J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson both have long, successful careers directing everything from prestige TV to high-concept fantasy and action. When it comes to Deborah Ann Chow, it's a bit of a different story. Now look, I'm not saying Deborah Ann Chow is a bad director by any means. When you're searching for someone to helm a project that will have as many eyeballs on it as this, a show that basically serves as a giant piece of nostalgia for all those kids that grew up watching the prequels and now hate the new Disney movies, it's important to pick someone who has the track record, the experience, and the resume to be able to pull it off. I knew of people who didn't watch any of the Disney Star Wars shows, and they still watch this. Why? Because it's profiting off the nostalgia of kids who are now grown adults that watch prequels when they were kids. No matter which way you look at it, this show was greenlit at least in part due to that reason. So with that in mind, you would think that Chow would have the years of experience and fortitude to pull something off like this. And contrary to what you may think, I actually think she had the capability to pull this off. Yeah, I really do. In fact, unlike JJ and Ryan, prior to directing the Obi-Wan show, she has directed two of what I consider to be the best episodes of the first season of Mando, like The Sin and Reckoning. She also directed episode Better Call Saul, Lost in Space, Jessica Jones, and some other TV shows. Now sure, it's not much, and from what I've seen, she hasn't produced anything up to this point, but at the very least, the show should have been competently shot. And for the most part, I guess it kind of is. That's the thing, a show as high profile as this from one of the most profitable companies in the entertainment industry should be exceptionally shot. So what do we do to fix it, and how do we change it? I think the most obvious thing to me would be to do what Mandalorian did and use the cool new filming technique called stagecraft, which involves shooting actors in front of these big LED lit cylindrical CGI backdrops that are still CG, but allow the actors to still see the environment around them and give convincing performance as opposed to like a green screen or something like that. It really works to show the scale and the scope of these big plants and allows the action set piece to just feel bigger. But honestly, maybe that wouldn't have worked for the show. Maybe the actors wouldn't have jived with it. I'm not sure. But honestly, I think Disney should have taken more time to find a director that could specialize in action like this that is dual-oriented. Why not hire someone like
Zhang Yimou,
or hell, even Ang Lee to direct this thing? Someone who has experience filming these visually sumptuous, engaging sword fighting akin to old Japanese samurai movies, like ones from Akira Kurosawa. Hire someone who could bring us to new places, someone who could take the world of Star Wars and bring us something we've never seen before. Andor does that. Andor does that really well. The Mandalorian show in general takes inspiration heavily from old spaghetti westerns, so why can't this Obi-Wan show inject some of that style into its DNA? Honestly, for my pick, I would go with Yimou. Imagine a Star Wars show filmed the same way that something like Shadow or Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is. God, that'd be so cool. Okay, so now that we have a remedy, theoretically, for the directing, the photography, and just the way the show looks, let's talk about what is, in my opinion, the bigger issue, and that's the writing. Now, the main issue I have with the writing in general for this show is mostly the reason why I want to make the video, at least, because I think one simple addition, specifically one character, would have made this show so much better and so much more interesting. It just makes so much sense. First, though, let's just talk about the dialogue. It's not great. It's not like the worst thing ever. Like, it's not as bad as the dialogue in the prequels for the most part, but at least the prequels have some goddamn hilarious lines in it.
Dreams pass in time.
I'd much rather dream about Padme. Just being around her again is intoxicating.
In this show, everyone speaks so simply and plainly. It's like some guy in film school who wants to be a screenwriter just like wrote this. It's kind of run of the mill, and none of the statements made by characters are just all that compelling or really say a whole lot about themselves without like beating you over the head with shit that's so obvious. Most of Obi-Wan's dialogue in this show just has him lamenting over how he failed Anakin, and his failure is the reason Anakin is evil. And part of the reason why I think his dialogue seems so bland is that he's saying most of it to like a 10-year-old, so he has to dumb it down. And speaking of Princess Leia, let me just say that while I'm not gonna shame this child actor for even being in the show, because that would be just unfair, and honestly I think that for what she is, she's just fine. Like, it could have been a lot worse, but her inclusion just feels so awkward. Like, aside from convincing Obi-Wan to get out of the rot that he's seen under because she's been captured, she doesn't really offer ways to push Obi-Wan's character forward. Their final conversation comes kinda close, but doesn't really solidify anything for either of their characters, and why should it? We don't learn anything new about Leia. All we learn is that she doesn't like being pampered as a princess, she's captured and rescued, she helps out a little bit, and she's there so the adults watching the show can be like, "Aw, she's adorable." And again, I don't even think the actress is that bad at all. And honestly, there are some subtle nuances to her character that does remind me a little bit of Carrie Fisher, but it's the mere inclusion of her in this narrative that just falls so flat. Also, Reva, dude, how many Sith turn good storylines do we need in this universe? And this one feels like the most predictable of all of them. Her dialogue is particularly cliche a lot of the time, and you can honestly pull her out of the story completely and nothing would really change. Yeah, it's good to show someone not as evil as Vader so it makes him look more threatening. I really don't get why we didn't just allow the Grand Inquisitor to just be the secondary villain. The makeup for him looks good, and he's already an established character that we like, that we haven't seen in live action before. Now look here, with Leia, there is one character we could swap her out for. One character I think fits the narrative perfectly and work really well to push Obi-Wan's character forward. A character people already love, we haven't seen in live action, and a character that Vader already knows. What if you replace Leia with Jar Jar with Cal Kestis? Now hear me out before you freak out and start typing in the comments that I'm stupid. Let's get the obvious problems and issues out of the way that this could cause. First off, as I'm going to record this video, the third game in what will be the Jedi game trilogy is not out yet, and we do not know where Cal's story concludes and where his character will be at the end of the trilogy. We do have a rough estimate and can kind of guess where his arc will go based on the first two games, but all that aside, putting him in the show could definitely cause some continuity issues to pop up that would contradict stuff in the game. But to combat this, after doing a little Google search, we can see that Jedi Survivor takes place roughly 10 years after Order 66. And to really give the Star Wars nerds a hard on, we'll say it takes place around 9 BBY. That's 9 years before the Battle of Yavin. Oh yeah, we're getting real technical here. And if we look at the Obi-Wan show, we can see that takes place around 10 BBY. So the times actually align perfectly because the show takes place around 1 year after the events of Survivor. You can place Cal in the story of the Obi-Wan show without really messing with the events of the previous game. The writers of the Obi-Wan show and Respawn can commune with each other on how Cal should be handled in the show, but the way I include him in the show will only strengthen his character, and it's more about how his experiences can improve Obi-Wan's character and facilitate the development of his arc. Now, put Cal in the show. Why? Well, it's mostly because the lesson that Cal learns in his game is a very similar lesson to what Obi-Wan has to learn in his own show. That being the rekindling of and rediscovering of faith in the Force. Cal's entire journey is about him basically learning how to use the Force again, and more importantly, that's the only path that can lead to the eventual restoration of the Jedi Order. Now this also leads into his struggle with the pull of the dark side, and we can even display this in the show by placing subtle moments that show Cal's utter devotion towards the light side of the Force is a bit gray. Similarly, Obi-Wan in this show is downtrodden, depressed, and living in anguish over the fact that he believes he failed to save his best friend from turning to the dark side. And while he hasn't completely rejected the Force, his faith in it is very much at its lowest state. He isn't the wise Obi-Wan that we see in the original trilogy quite yet. So by putting Cal on the show and having him interact with Obi-Wan, the master becomes a student once again. and Obi-Wan can learn from Cal that there is hope in the Force and that Anakin's fall to the dark side was not simply his doing. Plus, Cal now has another Jedi to interact with after Order 66, and he gets to see just how harrowing the situation is now that a master has lost so much faith in the Force. You could even include other things like the idea that Obi-Wan could teach him new fighting techniques, new Force powers. And another thing that actually works really well is that Obi-Wan will begin to witness more of Cal's sinister tendencies. This makes him realize that there is hope for redemption, that he can help Cal fully return to the light side as he was unable to with Anakin. Now, whether or not he succeeds in doing that is kind of a topic for another time, because then we would be diving into material that Jedi 3 will be exploring, I'm sure, in their game whenever that comes out. For Cal, you already have the actor who plays him in the game basically playing him in real life. Cameron Monaghan already plays Cal with motion capture in the Star Wars games. He already basically plays Cal anyway, so it'd be so easy to have him be in the show. He already is trained with choreography and does all the animations for the game, so it'd be so easy to incorporate his performance into the show. Now, I'm not a screenwriter, so I'm not going to provide like an entire synopsis, the whole show, because that would just take way too long. But I will say that I do think Cal should be the one to go look for and eventually find Obi-Wan. I'm not sure how he would find him, but I think it's important to have Cal seeking him for a reason that doesn't have to do with restoring the order. Maybe it's a rescue mission to find a recently captured Force-sensitive child. I think that's the route that I would go, because then we can still have Vader be actively involved in the conflict as well. Now, I definitely think it'd be really interesting to see a 2v1 fight with Obi-Wan and Cal versus Vader with the revamped photography and choreography akin to like a high-octane samurai fight like I mentioned before. I think it would ultimately be the best for Obi-Wan to be sort of out of his element in the first fight. Cal can be the one to carry him through the fight, so to speak, but definitely don't kill him because, well, you know. Hell, you could even throw the Grand Inquisitor in there as well instead of faking his death like the first couple of episodes, because like, yeah, that shit was just so stupid. You can also keep the interactions with Owen. I think that fleshes out the relationship a little better. Don't have Cal in the final fight so you don't undercut the emotional weight of that duel, because at the end of the day, the show is still mostly going to be about Vader, especially Obi-Wan. And delete Reva, because her inclusion in the story is just still so baffling even on rewatch. And one thing I say for last, because it would definitely change the show the most structurally, is that I don't think this project should even be a show. We live in a time when short seasons are kind of just like the standard, mostly because of how serialized shows have become. And I know this is technically a mini-series, it's only 6 episodes, but I don't think a story like this can really support a 6-ish hours long runtime. A story that leans into more of a character study and is so detached from the mainline Star Wars plot should be condensed to a film with a 3-act structure. You don't have to pad the runtime with Obi-Wan infiltrating a spaceship, everything with Reva. It would feel more streamlined and the pace would be so much better if it was a movie. So the final change will be that we return this into a film. Plain and simple. Probably like a little over 2 hours, and we're going to give it a theatrical release. Would have done well? I don't really know, because Rise of Skywalker has kind of put a damper on Star Wars hype. But either way, a theatrical release seems more appropriate. Wow, see what we just did there? We just turned a mediocre show into what I think would be a pretty good movie with the right execution. But what do you think? Did you like the Obi-Wan show the way it is, or would you have changed some things? Do you think my changes were good, or am I out of my depth? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this and this video does well, then I'll definitely do it again, because there were plenty of shows, movies that have shitty endings or have potential but could have been much better. So let me know in the comments what movie or show I should fix next. Alright, please like and subscribe, helps the channel grow, and yeah, I will leave it at that. So peace out.